this is part 9, the 4 elements of mind. The metaphysical mind is often viewed as some sort of monolithic entity, while the brain, in the physical sense, is understood as having many specific and separate parts. The mind itself is much more than just one generic thing, of course. It's ironic that in our world, where the intellect reigns supreme, we have cut the brain into countless parts, and yet we have left the mind alone, right? The mind is seen as just this one generic metaphysical thing. However, there are many different models of the mind in the metaphysical sense. And for thousands of years, through inward observation, the yogic traditions of India have concluded that the mind is comprised of 16 main parts, of which there are 4 main elements. And that's what we're going to look at in today's section on word magic. There are several different frameworks like this. So the yogic framework of the mind is one of many different frameworks that you can find that take a metaphysical map of the mind. So take this model for what it's worth. I'm not a yogi myself, although my partner is. She's definitely a yogini. She teaches yoga. The understanding of the yogic elements of mind really come very much through the self-awareness and observation of yourself, right? This all comes from the metaphysical sense. Having said that, once you learn these 4 main elements of mind, you go on to learn all 16 in the tradition of yoga, you can then see, or you can then detect these elements of mind at play in others as well. So understanding the 4 main parts of the human mind in the yogic tradition enables the seeker, which would be you, of course, the student, to both identify and understand these distinct aspects within yourself, right? This is where essentially these realizations come from, of course, in the yogic tradition, is from the introspective, right? From the subjective or the metaphysical sense, right? Not from observing the outside world, although it's very much possible to come into this knowing or this understanding from the outside in, although it's much more difficult, takes a lot longer time, right? So it's best to do it the way it was intended and the way it was most profoundly and most readily discovered, and that's from the inside out. So subsequently, the elements of one's own mind can receive individual attention and can be fine-tuned. So the importance of understanding at least the 4 main elements of mind in the yogic tradition is that you can start to think about these 4 aspects of your own mind, and you can raise your awareness to a higher level, right? And you can engage these different aspects, and you can really tune in, and you can really start to take this. You can take this understanding and this recognition, because once you recognize, oh, this is this part of my mind at work, and this is the other element, and this is the other element, and etc. Once you can do that, your awareness is just going to keep climbing and climbing, right? That's only the beginning. Okay, that's only the beginning, especially in yoga. It's the body and the mind and the spirit all acting together. When you think of yoga, you think of a physical action, and it very much is, but that is an integral part of the spiritual awareness right? They're you can't separate them, essentially, right? So yoga is often thought of as something you go do. You sign up for a yoga class and you go do this thing with your body, but of course it requires your mind and your spirit as well to be fully tuned in, right? So there's a lot of benefits to yoga. So all that I'm explaining in part 9 is really the psychic aspect, and when I say psychic, I don't mean as in psychic powers per se, but more the metaphysical, mental aspect of it, right? So this is just one part of the overall sense of the yogic mind. So don't think of the 4 main elements of mind as a hierarchy, okay? So throw that out the window because that's not going to help. I want you to more think of it as an interdependent holarchy, okay? Which means none is higher or more important than the other. They're all interdependent, okay? The term holarchy, if you know anything about the great Ken Wilber, who I think he coined this term holarchy. At least that's where I learned it from. This holarchy is a system of interdependent parts where the lesser depends on the greater, and everything that moves up the chain is part of everything. When a holarchy, for example, would be our physical existence, right? At the subatomic level, right, you have electrons, protons, neutrons, etc., right? Those are the building blocks, right, for the elements: hydrogen, helium, oxygen, etc. And those elements, of course, build the next level of material, of life, and they form the underlying structure, right? And then we have single-celled organisms, and I don't need to go through all of that. But essentially, our human bodies are a collection of all of the things that are simpler, that are more basic, plus, right? So we're like this walking zoo of this walking collection of all of these different processes, bacteria, single-celled organisms. There's all of these things happening in our bodies that form this holarchy, right? So it's not as if you take the smallest element away, if you take the cells away, if you take the electrons or the protons and neutrons, you take the smallest part away, then you cease to exist, and vice versa. You couldn't exist without them, and of course, they couldn't do what they're doing without you, in a sense, right? So this is what a holarchy is. So think of these 4 elements as a holarchy. Another important note about the yogic concept of mind is that there are likely other aspects which certainly exist, but from which we as humans do not perceive, much less understand. So what I'm saying is, in the human sense, we can recognize these 4 elements of mind, but if, let's say, you have a higher level of awareness and maybe you're some advanced alien species, or maybe you're just pure consciousness, whatever it is, there's different levels. Okay? This is only as far as the human mind can intuit, right? And what we can perceive as far as the greatest human mystics, at least the energy you would call a human in the avatar or the human form. So the 4 elements of mind are the following. The first one is manas. Manas is the sensory or processing mind, sometimes referred to as the 6th sense, okay? It's not, when I say sensory or processing mind, it's not necessarily the intellect, okay? I'm going to go through each one of these in detail in the following slides, so don't worry. As you know, I tend to be very long-winded, and so I have no problem explaining the same thing in a different kind of at a different angle until hopefully this gets you started on your own journey of understanding. So the manas is a sensory processing mind. It's kind of like, the way I understand it is, six senses, you have a sense that something isn't quite right? Something in the air feels weird or whatever, right? Another way of understanding manas is with athletes. You may have heard the sense of flow state, or this term flow state. So for me, I have a martial arts background, and I enjoy watching martial arts competitions. And you can just, there's just something that happens in certain high-level martial arts competitors where they reach this flow state. And this is the manas at work. Their instincts are kicking in, but it's instincts plus, because instincts will keep you safe from that which is perceived as danger. But this manas is like an opening into a new situation, right, where you're faced with danger, but then you have to do something on top of that. Instead of fight, flight, or freeze, you have to spontaneously, something must come out of you spontaneous that must react in the moment, and that, wins the match, for example, right? This is something that Bruce Lee talked a lot about, is feeling into, not thinking about, right, how to execute a move, but actually feeling into it and bringing your whole self and your senses into it, right? So this is this manas, or the sixth sense, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slides. The next one is buddhi. Buddhi from Sanskrit means to be awake. This is the intellect, or the reasoning mind, okay? This is the most common use of, this is the most commonly understood as the mind in general in the West. This is the intellect, right? What is the buddhi best at? What is the intellect best at? Its primary function, where it excels, is in analyzing things, to chop things into bits, right? Into understandable, digestible nuggets, right? And then compare them. Well, this and this and this and this and this, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. The third element of mind is the ahamkara. And this Sanskrit word describes identity, okay? So this is totally distinct from manas and buddhi. It is the sense of one who believes themselves to be in their mind. It can be compared to the ego, okay? It's a little bit different in some ways, but it is essentially it is this sense that you have of yourself somewhere in your mind and body, that you imagine how you look to the world, right? We have to have this sense of who we are in respect to the world, and this kind of reflection of ourselves inside of ourselves, if that makes any sense. Because if we have no distinction between ourselves and who we are, who we believe ourselves to be, and others, right, then there's no boundary at all, and things get weird and they just melt, and navigating your reality just isn't possible. So you need this ahamkara, or the ego. You might hear some spiritual teachers or spiritual types talk about the ego and how they don't have an ego and all that kind of stuff. That's just a bunch of bullshit. Having an ego is healthy, but like I've shown in previous videos with the king type of figure standing on top of the dragon, and the dragon's breathing fire, and you've got this ego happening. The ego is always there, and it does serve you in a specific sense, but you have to be standing on top of it. You have to control it. The ego doesn't go away, and nor does the ahamkara. You need it. It's very valuable, and we'll talk about that. The chitta is the final element of mind that we will discuss. The chitta is the most venerated concept in Buddhism. It's the overall background state of your heart, mind, and soul. And it really is your overall sense of being. It's not different from the ahamkara. It's different from the ahamkara in the sense that your overall sense of being, right, compares to the ahamkara in the way that you have an awareness, but the chitta is an overall sense of being in relation to the rest of everything in the world, right? It's your relation to others. It's your sense of being in yourself and in other. And of course, ultimately, those are coming together as one, whereas the ahamkara is really just your image of yourself projecting to the world, right? So that's kind of the main distinction. So let's cover the manas in a little more detail. So manas is the sensory processing mind, which generates all of the thoughts which occur to you, right? And when I say generate, this generation of thoughts is triggered. So it doesn't really generate, don't think of the manas as like, and by the way, none of these words I'm using are real, of course, right? That's the whole point of this word magic presentation, is to get you to think in a prelingual way, or is to get you to sense, to feel, to understand that none of these concepts, these are just very like vague descriptors. These are just to get you going into your own understanding, right? This isn't anything that's to be taken as gospel. So this generation of thoughts is triggered by other forces. So it's not really the manas doing it. It's this energy that's happening, right? These other forces are really just energy interacting in a sense, right? But these other forces, since you cannot think about this, you can't really decide what comes into your mind before it arrives there. It simply appears or occurs to you suddenly. Now you can choose to think about something. You can choose to focus on something, right? That is using the buddhi, right? But what happens when you're studying, when you're focused on something, and then something occurs to you, a thought comes in, right? That shift in energy, maybe the temperature changed slightly. Maybe you heard something outside. Maybe you felt something in your body. You felt hungry. Maybe you heard a little bit of music in the hallway and you smelled something. Whatever it is. It doesn't have to be sense oriented, by the way. These are just examples. It could be just something changed in the energy around you. And the field kind of, your body, of course, is sensitive to this energy because it's made of energy. Everything's made of energy. And this sudden shift in energy in some way brings up some kind of it triggers something, right? That's what the triggering is, essentially. So it triggers. There's some sort of, you could say, a disturbance in the force, but disturbance isn't the word, more like a fluctuation. Okay, some kind of fluctuation. And then you're in your buddhi, right? And you're studying, you're focusing, right? This is your buddhi mind. And then all of a sudden, you just had something just occur to me. You're pulled out of that, right? You're pulled out of your intellectual mind, and the manas, something triggers and whoosh, right? Something triggers and suddenly it occurs to you. Okay? This is the manas. Okay? Now, these other forces that I speak of are typically different forms of memory. And there's many different forms of memory, by the way. That's a completely different subject. Maybe that's one I'll discuss in the future. These different forms of memory are both articulate and inarticulate, which are stored in the body, including the head, Okay. The head is often not seen as part of the body. You think mind and body, right? But that's nonsense. Throw that away. This is your body, the whole thing, head to toe. That's your body, right? Your memories are stored in the body. So start using that term body to refer to your head and your body. They're not separate, right? This is my body. This is, part of your body, right? So memory is stored in all of these places. It's a very slippery subject when you talk about memory, right? Because it still has yet to be proven exactly where memory is stored in the body. It was presumed that it was somewhere in the mind. It was stored somewhere in the mind. But they've been cutting open different parts of rats' brains for years and putting them in the same maze, and the rats can navigate the maze just fine, even though they're missing this part of the brain, and then maybe this part, and maybe we're going to take this part out and this part. As long as the motor skills, the motor functions are there for the rat, by some strange miracle, the rat remembers how to navigate the maze, as long as it can kind of move, right? So memory is an interesting thing, and the manas is a big part of that. It's almost like the gateway between all the parts of memory and your mind. Let's think of the manas as that. So there's at least 8 dimensions or types of memory from which manas may draw from. Okay. Any number of sensations or stimulus in or outside of the body may activate a memory, which invokes a response or triggers a thought to occur, right? Manas, of course, is not the same as intellect, as I mentioned before. Instead, manas is the door of perception, where events simply flood into the raw awareness of your sensory mind. It's kind of like a gateway, right? Manas could be understood as the unconscious mind, okay? Which, of course, is constantly picking up information that your conscious mind or your waking mind selectively must filter out, right? If your conscious mind were taking in even half of the sensory information that the unconscious mind was, you would need some serious mental help. You would probably be in a very bad state. You would need help. You wouldn't be able to navigate the world in an everyday practical sense. So the manifestation of this automatic unconscious processing, okay, this is an automatic process of the unconscious. It's doing it without the conscious mind involved, because, like I said, if the conscious mind is involved in every little thing, you would just lose your conscious mind, right? That's not the function of your conscious mind, is to be aware of every little thing, right? It can listen to your unconscious selectively, but it can't process everything the same as the conscious, right? Think of the conscious, of course, as the buddhi mind, the intellectual processing, like task-oriented, right in front of you. I'm going to chop these up and compare these bits type of left brain, scientific, analyzing mind, versus the manas, the unconscious, the all-processing gateway, right? So this automatic unconscious process, where it affects the current state of your waking mind, could be understood as manas, right? As far as your conscious mind can perceive, or the things that come to it, is this manas, right? This action of the conscious gateway, where it's receiving these messages from the unconscious. And the unconscious messages could be, again, something from the senses, something from the air, the energy, a slight feeling, a shift in energy, shift in temperature, many different things. This could be understood as manas. Here's a great example to think about manas. Manas, think about it as something comparable to water. Anything that water or manas comes into contact with is remembered, okay? It has been well known for some time that water has a certain type of memory, which is yet to be explained by modern science. There are a few fascinating documentaries on the quality or the properties of water. Highly recommended that you look into water if you don't know about it. Any external stimulus interacting with manas or water causes a reaction which ripples through the water, the body, or manas. Okay. A trace element is always left behind in this way. After all, the body, your body, everything, right, is comprised of 2/3 water. So it would logically follow that the biggest store of memory for the human mind and its avatar, the body, is similar to water. Okay? Water is well known to hold trace elements of anything it touches. Anything it touches, it has trace elements. That, in a nutshell, is a form of memory. So since your body's mostly water, anything that touches you, not in a literal sense, like someone comes up and touches you, and your body does remember that, by the way, but anything that affects meaning causing ripples in your body, these emotional signals that you would feel, for example, you could liken those to ripples in a pond or waves in a lake or an ocean. We feel traumatic events. We remember those things in our body. We feel excitement, joy. We feel fear. We feel all of these things. Anytime you've had an intense moment of emotion in your life, you had something happen and was really intense. It was felt throughout your body. And this is touching. This is causing ripples through your body, right? And since you're 2/3 water to begin with, then you have trace elements of those events in your life in your body. That's where your memory is, right? Does this make sense? I hope so. Okay, so next is the buddhi. And this is the conscious intellect or the problem-solving mind. This is the mind that we're all very familiar with in this day and age that we live in, right? This is the most heavily emphasized part of the mind in the West. And arguably it's the only emphasized part of the mind in the West, right? To the extent that it may be seen as the only part worth discussing, right? Surely if you're a hardcore atheist, scientist type, no nonsense type of person, then this would be the only part of the conscious intellect worth looking at. Of course, that's not really giving a fair hearing to the rest of your being, but it is what it is for some people, unfortunately. So buddhi represents the processes of the neocortex, or things that come to the front of the mind to be cut open and analyzed. It is also part of the mind which turns thoughts into words and vice versa. Okay? The neocortex, of course, neo is new and cortex is the mind or the brain. It's the new mind. Neocortex is up front here. It's what I've heard referred to by Stefan Molyneux as the monkey expansion pack. So since we're 98% primates in our DNA, we have this highly developed neocortex or frontal lobe area that the primates don't have nearly a developed neocortex like we do. So we've got this monkey expansion pack happening, right? So buddhi, left to run on and on, right, can create an endless cycle of ceaseless dissection of subjects and events referred to as overanalyzing. It's very dangerous, right? We all know this. If you let your mind run on and on and on, and you don't get a hold of it and say, well, wait a minute, is my mind working for me, or am I just working to power this buddhi that's out of control, this ceaseless dissecting, cutting, analyzing, right? It serves a purpose. It's very important. We need this part of our mind, right? But we all know that we need to shut this off, or else it will run you into places that will really, really take you. You can just be pulled down this wild river of thought, right? For things that might happen, haven't happened yet, have nothing to do with the now and where you're at in the moment, right? It's dangerous, but we still need it, just like the ego. So this overanalyzing or mental diarrhea can eventually lead to a state of dis-ease in the mind and body. This is something that Aldous Huxley talked about. A lot of spiritual teachers over human history have talked about this state of dis-ease, right? Where, of course, we get the word disease. And Huxley was convinced that disease is largely caused, not completely, but can be largely caused by overstimulation or a less than, I would say, a less than disciplined approach to using your intellect. Just letting it run in circles all day, right? That causes a sense of dis-ease, because you can overanalyze things to death, right? You only have one life. You're going to die someday. What about your family? What do people think of you? If you keep doing that, you're running yourself into a state of dis-ease, right? And then and then, of course, the manifestation of human illness will come about. You're much more susceptible. So why do that to yourself, right? It's the intellectual mind of many people that bring themselves into a state of dis-ease. You might be one yourself. I know I, for a long time, was someone who overanalyzed everything. Everything had to be perfect. I had to do everything just right, or else it wasn't good enough, and ba-da-da-da-da-da. You have to let go of that, or else you're going to find yourself in a state of disease, right? You're going to have anxiety. You're going to have depression, all of these things. Do you love yourself or not, right? Don't do this to yourself. Give yourself a break, because no one is going to be as hard on you as you are on yourself if you're letting that part of your mind just run on and on and on, right? So exactly which thoughts we choose to dissect and analyze closely, or thoughts we readily accept and choose to store in our long-term belief systems, and how we wish to act or speak upon this information is regulated by the buddhi, right? This is all regulated by the intellect. Buddhi, or the intellect, can be compared to the elements of air and fire. So if we're talking about the elements here, of course, manas would be water, right? That's the first one. And the buddhi would definitely be air and fire. If your astrological sign, right, mine is Aquarius, so I'm an air sign. Obviously, I skew heavily towards the buddhi mind, more so than other places. So I'm having an awareness of that. You can then work on, you know automatically, this is something I need to work on. I need to get out of the intellect, right? And not stay there so much. That's something that I struggled with in my life, right? So the body consists of much less fire in proportion to the amount of air. However, both elements rely upon each other to flourish. Okay? So in the prana vayu, or life force of air in the body, if that's improved, one will experience improvement almost instantly in the areas of mental clarity and emotional stability. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about just simply breathing, right? Just focus on breathing. That's it. I mean, just taking that one breath, because I tend to talk a lot and then I'm not breathing properly, which I'm aware of. Just that one breath gives me quite an incredible feeling of ease, right? So working actively on the vayu, or breathing deeply into the body, right, helps resolve struggles with mental organization, allowing the process of thought to be more efficient. You can't think if you're not breathing properly, right? You just can't. When you're training in martial arts, one of the most common things that happens is people just they stop breathing. And if you stop breathing, you stop thinking, and then you forget some of the moves that you need, right? So this idea of breathing, people think, oh, I know how to breathe. I know how to breathe. No, you really don't. You trust me. Unless you've been doing yoga for 20 years, you don't know how to breathe. You don't know how to breathe to get clarity. I don't know how to breathe. I'll be the first one to admit that, right? My partner, she's always helping. She's always encouraging me to breathe more. That's something that I need to work on, for sure. So I'm not telling you that I know how to breathe, because